This is the largest island on Earth. It stretches more than 2,500 kilometres from its southern cape to its northern shore. Its coastline, traced along every fjord and headland, runs for some 44,000 kilometres. That is the length of the equator. A single island with a shore as long as the line that wraps the entire planet. And almost no one lives here. Around 56,000 people, on an island of 2 million square kilometres. It is the most sparsely populated territory in the world. 3 people for every 100 square kilometres of land. You could walk for days and meet no one. You could fly for hours and see no road, because there are no roads between the towns. There never have been. Both of these things are true at the same time. This is the biggest island on Earth, and it holds one of the smallest, most scattered populations of any place humans have ever settled. The instinct is to say it is empty because it is cold, because it is far, because it sits up against the Arctic, wrapped in ice, at the top of the map where few people go. But that is not the reason, not really. The cold is only the surface of the answer. There is something stranger underneath. The island has a name that promises green. It was given that name on purpose by a man who wanted others to follow him here. And for 500 years, people did. They built farms. They built churches. They raised cattle on grass that grew by the sea. Then they vanished. Every one of them. While, a few valleys away, another people lived on the same land, in the same cold, under the same sky, and are still here today. 2 peoples met this island. Only one of them remains. To understand why almost no one lives on the world's biggest island, you have to understand that most of it is not land you can live on at all. You have to understand what is pressing down on it. You have to look beneath the ice. So why does the largest island on Earth hold so few of us? Begin with the ice. Spread a map of Greenland on a table, and your eye fills with white. It is easy to read that white as a blank, a flat, featureless sheet, nothing there. But the white is not nothing. The white is the heaviest thing on the island. Roughly 80% of Greenland's surface is buried under a single sheet of ice. It is the second largest mass of ice on the planet after Antarctica. It covers more than 1.5 million square kilometers, an area broad enough to blanket a country the size of Mexico. And it is deep. On average, the ice is over 1.5 kilometers thick. At its center, it rises to more than 3 kilometers. Stand on the summit of that dome, and you would be standing on top of 3,000 meters of frozen water, with nothing but more ice between your boots and the buried rock far below. That ice holds 12% of all the glacier ice in the world. If it ever melted entirely, the oceans would rise by more than 7 meters. Every coastline you know would be redrawn. But the ice does more than sit on the land. The ice has changed the shape of the land itself. A sheet that thick is unimaginably heavy, and over hundreds of thousands of years, its weight has pressed down on the bedrock beneath it, pushed it, slowly, below the level of the sea. The center of Greenland is a bowl, a vast basin scooped out by the burden of its own ice, its floor lying in places 1,000 feet under sea level. And here is the thing that hides under all that white. If you could lift the ice away, Greenland might not be one island at all. Surveys of the rock beneath the sheet suggest that the land underneath is divided, split by channels that the sea would flood if the ice were gone. What looks on the map like a single enormous island may in truth be 3, held together only by the frozen weight that fills the gaps between them. Beneath the ice, there are mountains taller than the Alps. There is a canyon longer than the Grand Canyon, carved by ancient rivers of meltwater over millions of years. There is a crater, wider than a city, gouged out by an asteroid and then sealed under a kilometre of ice. And there is rock so old it is among the oldest on the face of the Earth, nearly 4 billion years old, formed when the planet itself was young. A whole hidden country, a landscape of peaks and gorges and ancient stone. And over all of it, the lid. On top of that lid, almost nothing can live. The interior of the ice sheet is one of the coldest places on the planet that is not Antarctica. Near its summit, on a December night in 1991, a weather station recorded a temperature of -69.6 degrees Celsius. It was the lowest temperature ever measured anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. The record went unnoticed for nearly 30 years before anyone realized what the instruments had caught. The cold up there is not only a matter of latitude, the ice makes its own weather. Its bright white surface throws the sunlight back into the sky before it can warm anything. And cold air, being heavy, slides downward. It pours off the high dome and races toward the coast in steady, draining winds, katabatic winds they are called, that can blow for days, carrying loose snow out over the sea. In the still, clear cold of the high interior, the air itself sheds tiny crystals of ice that drift down slowly even when there are no clouds. The old explorers had a name for it: diamond dust. A sky with nothing in it, quietly snowing. And the dead dome is not only ice, it is a record. Snow that falls on the summit does not melt. It is buried by the next year's snow, and the next, pressed deeper and harder until the air trapped between the flakes is squeezed into tiny bubbles and the snow becomes solid ice. Each layer holds the air of the year it fell, a sealed sample of an ancient sky. Drill down through the sheet and you drill backward through time. Near the bottom of the deepest cores lies ice that froze more than 100,000 years ago, holding bubbles of an atmosphere no human ever breathed. It was here, in cores pulled from this ice, that scientists first read the deep history of the planet's climate, the slow rise and fall of the ages written in frozen air. And the ice told them something unsettling. Buried in one of those cores was evidence that this very sheet had melted away once before, within the last million years, and that bare ground beneath it had grown plants, before the ice returned and sealed them under for ages more. The lid that looks eternal has lifted before. The white is old, but it is not permanent. It is only patient. Nothing grows here. No tree, no shrub, no blade of grass. No animal makes its home on the open dome. There is no soil, only ice, and beneath the ice, drowned rock. The center of the largest island on Earth is, for any living thing, a desert. A white desert 2 kilometers deep. In the summer of 1888, a young Norwegian sets out to cross it. His name is Fridtjof Nansen. He is 26. No one has ever walked from one side of the Greenland ice sheet to the other, and most who have tried have started from the inhabited west and turned back. Nansen does the opposite. He lands his party on the empty eastern coast and burns his bridges. There is no ship waiting, no settlement behind him. The only way off the ice is to cross it. For weeks they climb. The ice rises under them to nearly 9,000 feet. The temperature falls past -40. The wind never stops. There is no landmark, no shadow, nothing but a white plain curving up to a white sky. They haul their sledges through it, day after day, toward a coast they cannot see. And they make it. They come down the western slope half-starved, and they prove what no one had proven before, that the interior of Greenland is a single, unbroken, lifeless sheet of ice, all the way across. Nansen had walked the length of the thing that owns the island, and the lesson written into every frozen mile of it was simple. This is not a place for people. The land at the heart of Greenland gave humanity nothing, no ground, no warmth, no food. It set a single, absolute term: stay off. So the people went where the ice was not. But before we follow them to the coast, look at one valley the ice forgot. In the far south of Greenland, sheltered behind a wall of mountains, there is a forest. The only natural forest on the entire island. It is small, a narrow strip of birch and willow and rowan, perhaps 15 kilometres long, threading along a valley called Tsinghua. In a country of 2 million square kilometres, this is the one place where trees grow on their own. And the question is, why? Why here, and nowhere else in all that vastness? The answer is not warmth alone. The answer is the wall. Mountains over 1,500 metres high ring the valley on every side, and they do something the rest of the coast cannot. They block the wind. They stand between the trees and the cold, draining gales that pour off the ice sheet, the katabatic winds that strip every other valley bare. Behind that shelter, the summers grow just warm enough, just calm enough, for a tree to hold its ground. It is a small thing, that forest, but it tells you the whole rule of the island in miniature. It is not simply the cold that empties Greenland. It is the wind off the ice. Step out of the wind's reach, and life returns. Stay in it, and nothing stands. The same lesson is written into the animals. On the grassy plains of the west and the high tundra of the north, there is a creature that looks left over from another age. The muskox. Heavy, shaggy, horned, standing close to the ground. It has lived in the Arctic for tens of thousands of years. It walked the world of the mammoths, and it is still here when the mammoths are gone. What keeps it alive is the same thing that defeats the interior: the cold. And the muskox has answered the cold with engineering. Beneath its long outer coat lies a layer of fine underwool called kiviut, one of the warmest natural fibres known. Weight for weight, it holds heat far better than sheep's wool. Wrapped in it, a muskox can stand through a blizzard at 40 below and lose almost nothing of its warmth to the air. And when the wind turns truly savage, the herd does not run. It gathers. The animals form a ring, horns outward, the young and the weak pressed into the warm centre, and they wait the storm out as a single wall of wool and muscle. They do not fight the cold by fleeing it. They fight it by reading it, and by sheltering one another. It is the oldest survival strategy on the island, and it is not a human one. Remember that. The land here does not reward those who push against it. It rewards those who learn its terms and build a life inside them. Hold that thought. We will need it before the end. Now, the coast. The thin green rind around the white. If 80% of Greenland is ice, then the part where people can actually live is the remaining fifth. A ragged border of ice-free rock and tundra and fjord, pressed between the sheet and the sea. It sounds small. It is. And yet that ice-free margin still adds up to more than 400,000 square kilometres, a band of habitable land roughly the size of Norway, wrapped around the edge of the island like a rim around a vast white plate. But even within that rim, people did not settle evenly. They gathered overwhelmingly in one place, the southwest. And to understand why, you have to understand a quiet gift the ocean brings to this corner and to almost nowhere else on the island. Warm water. The same Gulf Stream that carries heat north along the coast of Europe sends a branch curling up Greenland's western shore. It does not make the southwest warm exactly, but it softens the cold. In the capital, Nuuk, the average winter temperature sits around -9 degrees. That sounds bitter, until you compare it. Across the water in Arctic Canada, at the very same latitude, the town of Iqaluit endures winters near -27. The same line on the globe, 18 degrees of difference. The ocean draws that line. And the shape of that coast, the long, narrow inlets the boats and the towns depend on, is itself the work of the ice. In the ages when the sheet was even larger than it is now, its glaciers ground their way down to the sea through every weakness in the rock, gouging out deep, steep-walled valleys as they went. When the ice drew back, the sea flooded in behind it and filled those valleys to the brim. These are the fjords, drowned glacial canyons, sometimes hundreds of metres deep, reaching far inland from the open ocean. They are the reason the southwest is livable at all. They break the wind. They hold back the drifting pack ice. They give water deep enough for a harbour, and they reach inland to fresh water and to grass. The same ice that made the interior uninhabitable carved, at its edges, the only shelters where a town could ever stand. So, the southwest became the place. Not because it is kind, because it is less cruel than everywhere else, and because the sea reaches into it through long, sheltered fjords, deep enough for boats, rich enough for fish. This is where Nuuk stands, the capital of Greenland and the smallest capital of almost any nation on Earth. Around 20,000 people live here, and that is fully a third of the entire country, gathered in a single town at the mouth of a fjord, 64 degrees north, just below the Arctic Circle. It is the northernmost capital city in the world. By the standards of the world cities, it is tiny. There are 3 sets of traffic lights in all of Greenland, and every one of them is in Nuuk. There is one road tunnel on the entire island. It is here. There was once a single apartment block in this town, called Block P, that housed more than 1% of the country's whole population under one roof. And here is the strangeness of it. The biggest island on Earth has no internal roads at all. You cannot drive from Nuuk to the next town. There is no next town within driving distance, and even if there were, there would be no road to reach it by. Every settlement on the island stands alone, connected to the others only by sea, by air, by helicopter, and in the deep north by sled across the frozen winter ocean. Each town must therefore be a world unto itself, its own power station, its own water, its own heat. There is no national grid running between them because there is no land bridge to carry one. If a town's power plant fails, there is nowhere else for the electricity to come from. The lights simply go out and stay out until the plant is mended. The same is true of water, of heat, of every wire and pipe that a town anywhere else would draw from somewhere beyond its own edge. This is what the land has done to the people who live on it. It has not only pushed them to the rim, it has cut each piece of the rim off from every other piece, and forced every community to stand on its own. The ice in the middle is not just an empty space, it is a wall 2 kilometres high, dividing the inhabited coast into a string of separate islands of human life, each one alone with the sea. And the ground those towns stand on is not ordinary ground. Across most of Greenland's ice-free rim, the earth itself is frozen. Permafrost, soil locked solid the year round, thawing only in a shallow skin at the surface during the brief summer. You cannot easily dig into it. A grave is hard to cut. A pipe cannot simply be buried and trusted, because the freezing and thawing of that top layer heaves and splits whatever is laid in it. To build here is to build on something that moves with the cold. Every foundation, every water line, every short road within a town must reckon with a ground that will not hold still. And over all of it falls the strangest rhythm of the far north, the rhythm of the light. This far toward the pole, the sun does not simply rise and set. For weeks in the depth of winter, in the northern settlements, it does not rise at all. The land lies in a long blue twilight, and then in darkness, day after day, the noon sky no brighter than dusk. The cold deepens, the sea locks. People live by lamplight through a night that lasts not hours, but months. And then the wheel turns, and the debt is repaid. Through the height of summer, the sun does not set. It circles the whole sky around the clock, and the land lies bathed in a light that never goes out. Midnight as bright as afternoon, the tundra flushing green, the brief and frantic season when everything that lives here must feed and breed and grow before the dark returns. Every living thing on the island is shaped by that swing. The plants race through their entire year in a few lit weeks. The animals fatten in the endless day against the endless night. And the people, too, have always lived in two worlds, the dark one and the lit one, hunting hard through the bright months, drawing close through the long black ones. It is another of the land's terms, not the cold this time, but the light, doled out in extremes, half a year of it withheld, and half of it poured out without pause. And it is the sea in the end that feeds them all. Look at where Greenland's food and Greenland's wealth come from, and you find the answer is almost never the land. It is the water. More than 9/10 of everything Greenland sells to the world is fish, drawn from the cold seas around the coast, northern shrimp, and a deep water halibut that lives in the dark trenches off the shore. And the reason the sea is so rich is, of all things, the ice. As the ice sheet melts at its edges, the meltwater it pours into the fjords is not pure. It carries minerals ground out of the bedrock far below, iron above all, scraped loose by the slow grinding of the glaciers. That iron is food for the tiny floating plants that drift in the surface water. Feed the plants, and you feed the creatures that eat them, and the fish that eat those, and the seals and the whales, and the people at the very top of that chain. The dead, frozen interior, melting at its rim, fertilizes the living sea. The water that drains out of the heart of the island comes back as food. But the sea gives and the sea takes. In the 1960s, the waters off the west coast teemed with cod, hundreds of thousands of tons hauled up in a single year. And then, within a generation, the cod were gone. The stocks collapsed. A way of life that had felt permanent proved to be only a moment. On this island, nothing the sea offers is promised. It is borrowed. And the oldest foundation of all that the sea gave, for the people most of all, was the seal. In the cold water and along the ice edge, the ringed seal is everywhere. And for the hunters of this coast, it was very nearly everything. Meat to eat, fat to burn in the lamp for light and warmth through the dark months, skin for clothing and for the cover of the boats. The whole winter world of the northern Inuit turned on it. In the locked season, a hunter would find the small breathing hole a seal kept open in the sea ice, and wait beside it, motionless, in the cold, sometimes for hours, for the single moment the animal rose to breathe. Everything depended on knowing the ice, knowing the creature, and outweighting it. The land grew almost nothing a person could eat. The sea, read correctly, gave them all of it. Even the animals of the rim live by reading the cold, the way the muskox does. Consider the Arctic fox, a small thing, the size of a house cat, that walks through winters no larger creature could survive. It does not begin to shiver until the air falls below -50. And the way it holds its heat is a quiet piece of plumbing built into its own legs. In the veins of its feet, the warm blood flowing down from its body runs alongside the cold blood returning from its pores, and as they pass, the warmth crosses over, heating the returning blood before it reaches the core. The fox can stand on frozen ground for hours and barely bleed any heat into it through its feet at all. Its coat thickens threefold for winter and turns from brown to white so that it vanishes against the snow. Furred even on the soles of its paws, it crosses the pack ice like a creature wearing boots. It does not conquer the cold. It is built, down to the blood in its legs, to give the cold nothing. That is the only way anything stays alive on the rim of this island, not by force, but by losing nothing. Follow the western coast north, and you come to one of the strangest places ice makes. A place where the buried heart of the island finally comes pouring out to the sea. Near the town of Ilulissat, a great river of ice flows down off the sheet and into a fjord. It is called Sermek Kujalek. It is among the fastest moving glaciers in the world, sliding seaward at 20 meters and more in a single day, fast enough that, over a few days, you could watch the ice advance. Where it reaches the water, it breaks. Vast slabs the size of buildings crack away and float off as icebergs, drifting down the fjord and out into the bay in a slow, white fleet. This is one of the great factories of the Northern Hemisphere's ice. Much of the frozen water that the interior of Greenland sheds into the Atlantic leaves through this single fjord. The icebergs that crowd these waters were once snow that fell on the high dome thousands of years ago, pressed into ice, carried slowly downhill across centuries, and released here at last into the sea. The hidden water of the dead interior finding its way out. On the shore of this fjord, in 1879, a boy was born who would come to embody the other half of the island's story. His name was Knud Rasmussen. He was the son of a Danish missionary and a mother of Greenlandic Inuit descent, and he grew up speaking the Greenlandic tongue and driving dogs across the sea ice as the local children did. He would spend his life crossing the Arctic by sled, living among the northern hunters, writing down their songs and their knowledge before they could be lost. He understood something most outsiders never grasped, that the people of this island had not merely endured the cold, they had read it, generation upon generation, until reading it was second nature. We will come back to Knud Rasmussen and to what his people knew that others did not. Go further still, northeast into the largest emptiness on the island. Across the entire north and east of Greenland stretches a single protected wilderness so vast it is difficult to hold in the mind. The National Park of Greenland covers nearly 1 million square kilometres. It is the largest national park on Earth, larger than most countries, and almost no one lives in it at all. A handful of staff, the occasional patrol, musk oxen on the grass flats, wolves white as the snow hunting them. Across those same flats drift the caribou, wild reindeer, moving in loose herds over the tundra, grazing the lichen and the low summer growth that the brief, warm weeks coax from the thin soil. They are the great wanderers of the north, covering long distances between their feeding grounds, shaped by the same scarcity as everything else here. Where the land offers so little, you must keep moving to gather enough of it. The wolf follows the caribou follows the thor, and the whole sparse machinery of life on the flats turns on the narrow margin the cold allows. And ice and rock and silence for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. We call places like this empty. The maps shade them blank and leave them unlabeled. But that word, empty, says more about us than about the land. To the eye that came looking for cities, the north of Greenland is empty. To the land itself, it is simply full of what belongs there. The wolf and the ox and the wind are not an absence. They are the answer the place gives when no one tries to force a town onto it. And in that great northern silence lives the animal that has become the very face of the Arctic, though it does not truly live on the land at all. The Greenlandic word for it is nanok, the polar bear, the largest land predator on the planet, and yet it spends most of its life not on the land, but out on the frozen surface of the sea, where the seals are. The ice is its hunting ground. When the sea ice thins, the bear comes ashore only because it must. It is built, like everything that survives here, for the cold. Beneath its fur, the skin is black, to soak up what little warmth the sun offers. The fur itself is not truly white. Each hair is clear and hollow, scattering the light so that the animal seems to vanish into the snow. Under the skin lies a thick blanket of fat, and it hunts on the sea, not the soil, because the soil of this island offers a great predator nothing. That is the quiet truth the Nanok shares with the people who have lived here longest. On the largest island on Earth, the richest hunting ground was never the land. It was the frozen sea. The bear knew it, and so, long before any European set foot here, did the Inuit. Now cross to the other coast, the east, and you find the rim at its thinnest and most besieged. The eastern shore of Greenland faces the open Arctic, and the Arctic sends its ice down to meet it. A great river of drifting pack ice flows south along this coast for much of the year, choking the approaches, sealing the harbours, making the sea itself a barrier rather than a road. Where the west has its sheltered fjords and its warmer current, the east has the ice press, grinding down from the pole. And so the east is nearly empty even by Greenland's standards. Fewer than 1 in 10 Greenlanders live in the whole of the north and east combined. The largest town on the entire eastern coast, Tasiilaq, holds fewer than 2,000 people. So isolated were these communities for so long that the people here came to speak their own dialect of Greenlandic, a tongue understood by only a few thousand souls, shaped by centuries of distance from the crowded West. The pattern is the same one we have seen everywhere on this island, written a little harder. Where the sea is kind, people gather. Where the sea turns hostile, they thin to almost nothing. The land does not decide where Greenlanders live. The sea decides, and the ice that rides upon it. And in the far north, where the ice never wholly leaves, the people made the strangest piece of all with it. They turned the frozen sea into a road. Near the top of the island, around the settlement of Karnak, there is no soft season long enough to depend on open water. For much of the year, the sea is locked solid. But a locked sea is not a closed one, not to people who have learned to use it. Across that ice, the hunters of the north drive teams of dogs, sometimes for days, hunting seal and narwhal at the ice edge, travelling between places that no boat could reach and no road has ever joined. These are the waters of the narwhal, the pale, spiraled creature that medieval Europe knew only as the source of the unicorn's horn. The long tusk that twists from the male's jaw is not a horn at all, but a single tooth, grown out through the lip, threaded with millions of nerves that seem to read the sea around it. The narwhal lives its whole life in these icy northern waters, diving deep beneath the pack to feed, surfacing at the cracks and the open leads to breathe. For the hunters of the far north, it was a prize beyond price. Its skin, one of the few sources of the vitamins the dark months stripped away. Hunter and narwhal, both bound to the same edges of the same ice, both fluent in the same frozen sea. Here too, the language splits off into its own northern form, spoken by perhaps 1,000 people at the very rim of the inhabited world. Think on what that means. In most of the world, ice is the thing that stops you. Here, ice is the thing that carries you. The winter sea, frozen hard, becomes the only highway the North has ever had. The people did not wait for the land to give them a road. The land never would. So they made one out of the very thing that should have trapped them. That is not endurance. That is fluency. They speak the language of the ice. And no creature speaks the language of the cold longer than the one that lives in the black water beneath all that ice. In the deep, frigid sea around Greenland swims the Greenland shark. It moves slowly, almost impossibly slowly, through water near freezing, a meter or two a minute, in no apparent hurry at all. And it has no reason to hurry, because it has all the time in the world. The Greenland shark is the longest living animal with a backbone known to science. Some of them, scientists believe, are more than 3 centuries old. A shark swimming in these waters today may have been born before the steam engine, before the modern world began. Its secret is the cold itself. In near-freezing water, everything slows. The heartbeat, the growth, the whole machinery of the body. The shark grows perhaps a centimeter a year. It does not reach adulthood for over a century. Where the land races to grow in its brief summer and then shuts down, this creature has made the opposite bargain. It has surrendered to the cold so completely that it has turned slowness into a kind of immortality. It is the living memory of these waters, a single animal that has felt the same cold, unchanged, for 400 years. So we have walked the whole shape of the island now. The dead white interior, the thin green rim, the kind southwest and the besieged east, the frozen roads of the north. We have seen how the land sets every term, and how every living thing, the ox, the fox, the bear, the shark, survives only by reading those terms and giving the cold nothing. Which brings us at last to the two peoples, and to the heart of the question. Because the land set the same terms for both of them, and only one of them is still here. The first humans reached Greenland around 4,500 years ago. They came not from Europe, but from the west, from the Arctic islands of what is now Canada, crossing the frozen straits in a series of slow migrations. Peoples whose names we barely know, who lived along these coasts and then faded, one culture giving way to the next over thousands of years. Then, around the year 1200, a new people begins to move into Greenland from the Canadian Arctic. They are the Tula. They are the ancestors of today's Greenlanders. And they arrive carrying something the earlier peoples did not have: a complete toolkit for living off the frozen sea. The kayak, light and silent, for hunting from the water. The harpoon, with its detachable head, for taking seal and walrus and whale. The dog sled, for crossing the winter ice. They do not try to bend the land to a way of life brought from somewhere warmer. Their whole way of life is built from the ground up for exactly this. Consider what that toolkit really was. It was not crude. It was the most sophisticated cold weather technology on Earth. The kayak was a skin stretched over a frame of driftwood and bone, sealed so closely to the hunter wearing it that he could roll over beneath the freezing water and come upright again without sinking. A craft so well made that the modern world simply kept its name and its shape. The larger open boat, the umiak, could carry whole families and the catch of a whale. The harpoon's head was made to detach and turn sideways inside the wound, holding fast where a fixed point would tear loose, with a float of sealskin to tire the animal and keep it from sinking out of reach. And in the open, with nothing but the snow underfoot, a hunter could cut blocks and raise a domed shelter in under an hour. A house built from the very thing that was trying to kill him, and warm enough inside over a single lamp of seal oil to wait out any storm. None of this was luck. It was the patient reading of the ice across 100 generations, refined and carried and taught, until a people could meet the coldest coast on Earth with precisely the tools it demanded. They did not arrive hoping the land would soften toward them. They arrived already speaking its language. And at almost the same moment in history, from the opposite side of the world, another people arrives. Around the year 985, a Norse chieftain sails west from Iceland and makes landfall on the southern coast. His name is Eric the Red. He has been exiled from Iceland for killing men in a feud, and he is looking for a place to begin again. He finds the sheltered fjords of the southwest, the same kind southwest the Gulf Stream warms, and there, for a brief window in history, the climate is mild enough that grass grows thick by the water. And Eric does something clever. He names the place Greenland. Not because it is green, most of it, he has surely seen, is anything but. He names it green because a green name will draw settlers, and settlers are what he needs. It is perhaps the oldest piece of marketing in the North Atlantic. And it works. Ships follow him west. Families come. They build a country here. 2 settlements, eastern and western, spread along the southern fjords. Some 500 farms in all at the height of it. They raise cattle and sheep and goats on the coastal grass. They build houses of stone and turf. They build churches, real churches, with bells brought across the sea at great cost. They bury their dead in consecrated ground and send word back to Norway and Rome. For close to 500 years, there is a European farming society living on the edge of the Greenland ice. By any measure, they made a life here. And then the world turned colder. Slowly, across the 13 and 1400s, the climate of the North Atlantic cooled into what we now call the Little Ice Age. The summers shortened, the seas grew stormier and choked more often with ice, cutting the long sea route back to Norway. The grass that fed the cattle grew thinner and for fewer weeks of the year. The terms of the land were changing, and changing against the Norse. And here is the thing the bones tell us. The Norse did not change with them. They had brought a way of life from warmer ground, the farm, the cow, the church, the field, and they held to it. They stayed tethered to their stone byres and their pastures, even as the pastures failed. Living a few fjords away were the Tula, taking seal and whale from the frozen sea in numbers that could have carried the Norse through any winter. The knowledge was right there, on the same island, in plain sight. The Norse did not take it up. They called these neighbours by a contemptuous name and, it seems, mostly kept their distance. The last years were not gentle. In the ruins of the Western settlement, archaeologists have found the bones of the colonists' own hunting dogs, butchered for meat. The food of last resort, the animals you eat only when there is nothing else. They have found skeletons marked by hunger. The Western settlement was abandoned around the middle of the 1300s. The Eastern one held on longer, dwindling, isolated, forgotten by a Europe that had stopped sending ships. The last written record of Norse Greenland is a small one, a wedding, recorded at a church called Hvalsi in the early 1400s. People still gathered, still married, still kept the forms of the world they had carried across the sea. And then the records stop. The ships found no one. Sometime in the 1400s, the last of the Norse Greenlanders died or sailed away, and the farms fell silent. Let that sit for a moment. A people lived on this island for 500 years, and then were gone, completely, leaving only stone walls and a single wedding entry to mark that they had ever been. They did not vanish because the land was impossible. The Thule proved that. They vanished because they tried to live against the land's terms instead of within them. They were farmers on a coast that would, in the end, feed only hunters. And when the land changed the rules, the people who had bent themselves to a foreign way of life could not bend back. The Thule did not make that mistake, because they had never made the bargain in the first place. They had no farms to tie them down, no cattle to feed, no church bells to carry across the sea. They were mobile, and they were few, and they placed themselves exactly where the frozen sea was richest. When the ice advanced, they followed the seals. When a hunting ground failed, they moved. Their whole society was light enough to bend with the land, and skilled enough to take its harvest from the one place it was always offered, the water and the ice on the water. They were not stronger than the Norse. They were fluent where the Norse were foreign. This is the answer. This is the single fact beneath all the others that explains why almost no one lives on the largest island on Earth. The interior cannot be lived on at all. It is a desert of ice 2 kilometers deep, pressing the very bedrock below the sea. The rim can be lived on, but only barely, and only in the kind corners the sea reaches, and only by a way of life built entirely around the frozen water rather than the frozen ground. And a life like that, hunting the sea ice, following the seal, spread thin along a coastline as long as the equator with no roads to join it, is a life that supports thousands, tens of thousands. It was never going to support millions. The land does not permit it. It never did. Greenland is not empty because no one could survive here. It is empty because the only way to survive here is the way that needs the whole vast coast to feed a single small people. The size of the island is not a measure of how many can live on it. Almost all of that size is the very thing that keeps them out. And the people who understood this first, who read the terms and built a life that fit them, are the ancestors of the Greenlanders living here today. Nearly 9 in 10 people on the island are of Inuit descent. The Norse, who came to conquer the land with the plough, are gone. The Thule, who came to live with the ice, remained. One more chapter before we close, because the land was not done writing its terms. In the early 1700s, Europe came back. A Danish-Norwegian missionary named Hans Egede sailed for Greenland in 1721, sent to find the lost Norse colonists and bring them the Reformed faith. He did not know they had been dead for 300 years. He found no Europeans at all, only the Inuit, living as they had always lived, along the same sheltered southwest coast the Norse had chosen and the sea had always favoured. Egede stayed. In 1728, the town that would become Nuuk was founded near his mission. And so the modern map of Greenland was drawn, in the end, along the very same rim Inuit had used for centuries, because the land allowed no other. But the meeting carried a cost that no good intention could soften. The Europeans brought sickness with them, against which the people of the island had no defence. In the 1730s, a smallpox epidemic swept through the settlements around the new colony and killed a great part of the native population there. It is a pattern written across the whole history of contact in the Americas and the Arctic, and it was written here too. Quietly, terribly, in the first years of the colony that would grow into the capital. The land had set its terms in cold and ice and distance. History added its own. So, stand back now and look at the whole of it. The largest island on Earth, 2.5 million square kilometres of it. And on a clear map, you can almost trace, with a fingertip, the narrow thread where human life is possible. A green rim around a white centre, broken into separate pieces by an ice sheet that pushes the bedrock below the sea and divides the coast into islands of people who can reach one another only by water and air. We look at that map and we read the white as waiting, as space that ought to be filled. The instinct runs deep that a place this large should hold multitudes, that emptiness is a kind of failure, a blank waiting for a city. But the white is not waiting for anything. The white is the land's honest answer. It is what Greenland is, an ice continent with a living edge. And on that edge, life does exactly what it has always done. It reads the cold and gives it nothing. The muskox folds into its wool. The fox cools the blood in its own legs. The bear hunts the frozen sea. The shark slows itself almost to stillness and outlives empires. And the people drive their dogs across the winter ice and take the halibut from the dark water and gather in the few sheltered corners where the sea is kind, exactly as their ancestors did 800 years ago. In the last of the summer light, on the tundra of the rim, an Arctic hare sits motionless among the rocks, white against a land that is turning white around it, waiting out the turn of the year the way everything here waits. Patiently, quietly, built for exactly this. Life on the edge of the great ice, not in spite of the land, in agreement with it. Knud Rasmussen, the boy born on the Ilulissat shore, who grew up to cross the whole Arctic by sled, understood this better than anyone. He knew that the knowledge his mother's people carried was not a primitive thing to be pitied, but a fluency hard won over thousands of years. The deep, patient understanding of a land that forgives nothing and feeds those who learn to read it. That knowledge is the true inheritance of this island, not the stone walls of the Norse, the fluency of the people who stayed. And that fluency is being tested again. The young of the small settlements increasingly leave for the towns, and from the towns for Denmark, drawn away to schools and lives the rim cannot offer. The ice that defined everything is itself changing now, melting faster at its edges than it has in living memory, redrawing the very coastlines the people depend on. The terms of the land are shifting once more, as they shifted on the Norse. What that will mean for the thin green rim, no one yet knows. But the question we began with has its answer. Why does almost no one live on the world's biggest island? Because the world's biggest island is, for the most part, not a place to live at all. It is the second greatest mass of ice on Earth, with a narrow shore of stone wrapped around it. Because the only life it has ever permitted is one that reads the frozen sea rather than the frozen land. And a life like that, spread along a coast as long as the equator, was always going to be a life of the few. The size was never an invitation. The size was the ice. And the ice set the terms. Thank you for traveling to the edge of the Great White Island with us. Until the next journey, take a breath and stay a while.